Howdy and welcome to the third and final part of forging a rifleman's knife. This is where we left off in part 2. As you can see, we've got the blade pretty much done, the guard has been shaped, the spacer has been shaped, and the antler handle has been temporarily attached to the knife. We've got a lot of work to get done in this video, so let's go ahead and get started. First thing we need to do is go ahead and drill in some anti-rotation pinholes. This is just going to allow us to secure that handle nice and tight onto the tang of the knife, and it's going to allow this handle to not rotate any, hence the term anti-rotation pins. Next, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of file work to the spacer, and this is just for pure decoration. It serves no purpose other than that. If you look at the spacer though, you can see that there's two little pins sticking out of the spacer. And those two pins are going to go into those holes that we just drilled. And like I said before, it's just going to secure the handle on there and prevent it from rotating back and forth on the knife. But we're just going to use a series of files to come in and add a little bit of extra dimension to the spacer. Now we're going to turn our attention to the pommel. So we'll begin by using a saw here just to come through and cut out the stock material. We'll then move into cutting off the corners of the stock material to make it more of a somewhat round shape. And then once we get it rounded off to the shape of the antler, I'm going to come in with a series of files to begin shaping and smoothing everything out and adding more dimension to the pommel just like we did with the spacer. Alright, now that all the metal parts are finished and filed, we can go ahead and add the finished coating on them. Now, instead of using a chemical-based solution or an artificial antiquing solution, I'm going to go ahead and fire blue this and then put wax on it, and it'll kind of blacken the steel. I do this method with some tools that I make, and this is more of a traditional method as well, so it kind of goes along with the 18th century style that I'm trying to do here. Now that we got the majority of the metalwork out of the way, we can turn our attention to the handle. So the first thing we need to do is shorten up this antler just a little bit so we can account for the room that the pommel is going to take up. Alright, I've gone ahead and done a little bit of filing to the front side of the antler, and you can see where it's white. And now I'm going to come in and add some leather dye to the antler itself. Now there's many different methods that we can use here to dye the antler, but leather dye is by far the easiest and the quickest way that I've found. So the front part of the handle here where it's white, when we file everything away, it's going to become a lighter color than this brown will be. And it's just going to give a real nice contrast to the antler itself. And it's going to have a very nice kind of flow from light to dark at the back of the handle. So we'll just do a couple coats of this leather dye. I'll let it dry, and then we'll move into doing some file work on the antler itself. Now time for the final assembly so we can move on to making a sheath for this thing. Alright, so for the sheath, we're just going to be using some deer skin here to kind of maintain that historical accuracy. Now, historically, they probably would not have used deer skin with hair on, When we look further back in history, though, like say with the Vikings or even the Romans, they did put hair inside of the scabbard or the sheaths just to protect the blade itself. I'm not really too concerned about that, but this is what I had on hand, and I wanted to keep it somewhat historically correct, so this is why I chose to use this deer skin. So I'm just going to cut some of the fur off. That way the blade doesn't slice through the hair as we put the blade in the sheath and when we take it out. Next, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of stretch the hide a little bit. This is going to help in case the sheath gets wet. It's not going to shrink up as much by me stretching it like this. And next, we're going to go ahead and apply some leather dye. Now, historically, they would have used maybe some walnuts to dye this or some butternuts to dye this, but I don't want to get all messy with that, so we're just going to use some regular leather dye here. Next, we're going to move on to the stitching. Now, you'll notice that I went ahead and added another piece of leather or deer skin up top where the guard is, and that's just for looks. That serves no purpose. And you'll notice that the deer hair is actually on that still. I think it gives it kind of a nice frontier style look, just something a little different. Now, it is important to note here that the sheath is extremely thin compared to modern standards. And the reason for that, again, is just historical accuracy. Back in the 1700s, even the 1800s, they were just concerned with having some way to house their knife. That way the blade and the edge wasn't just out in the open. And they're not going to be using a bunch of different materials, bunch of different pieces of leather to do that, because in the end, not everything was available, so they just had to use what they had. Let's just run a quick test here, make sure that the blade is indeed sharp. And as you can see, it's just shaving the hair right off of my arm, so we're good to go there. If you liked the video and you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments about anything you saw in this video, feel free to put them down below. If you'd like to stay up to date on current projects and upcoming videos, feel free to check out my Instagram. It'll be linked down in the description. And remember to keep your tools sharp and your mind sharper. And thanks for watching.